The year was 2347, and humanity had just started, spreading across nearby star systems when she arrived from the heavens above her. Name was Lyrian Starweaver, and she came in a ship that glowed like captured moonlight, and her pointed ears and strange beauty showed she was not human at all. Commander Kate Morrison of the Earth Defense Fleet welcomed her with open arms, and billions of people watched across the solar system with hope in their hearts. Beside Lyrian walked her companion named Ashenthar, who was a dragon with scales that shifted between midnight blue and deep violet, and his eyes seemed to hold the wisdom of countless ages. The dragon was no larger than a horse, but his presence filled every room with an ancient and terrible power that made people step back in fear and wonder. For 3 long months, Lyrian shared amazing things with humanity, and she taught human scientists about traveling faster than light and about controlling energy in ways they had never imagined. She told them about the Council of Starbound races that governed this part of the galaxy, and she walked among humans with grace and kindness, and Ashenthar was always at her side watching everything. With those ancient violet eyes, people began to believe that humanity would have a glorious future among the stars, and children dreamed of visiting alien worlds and making friends with beings from across the galaxy. But Kate Morrison was a careful woman, and she noticed things that others did not see. In their excitement and joy, she saw how Lyrian smiled, but the smile never reached her silver eyes when she talked about Earth's military power, and she saw how Ashenthar watched human soldiers with an intensity that seemed like he was calculating weaknesses rather than just being curious. Certain questions about Earth defenses were asked again and again from different angles, as if someone was looking for holes in their armor. On the night before they were supposed to sign the Alliance Treaty, Kate found Lyrian standing alone on the observation deck of Orbital Station 7, and she was staring down at Earth. Ashenthar lay coiled beside her and seemed to be sleeping, but Kate saw one violet eye open just a crack to watch her as she walked closer. Lyrian spoke softly without turning around and said it was beautiful, and asked if Kate had ever thought that sometimes the greatest kindness required the hardest choices. Before Kate could ask what she meant, alarms began screaming through the entire station, and everyone ran to see what was happening in the space beyond Earth orbit. Reality itself seemed to tear open like fabric being ripped apart, and 100 warships appeared out of nowhere. They had the same shimmering design as Lyrian's ship, but these vessels were covered in weapons, and their hulls were scarred from countless battles across the stars. The Council fleet had arrived, but they had not come in peace. At Alarine, hand went to a device on her wrist, and she whispered that she was sorry, and there were real tears in her eyes that ran down her cheeks. She said that humanity was never meant to join the Council as equals, but was meant to serve it as slaves. Ashenthar rose to his full height and spread wings that had not been visible just moments before, and the dragon roar shook the station metal walls. Kate realized with complete horror that the creature was far larger than it had appeared. Some kind of trick had been hiding its true massive size all along. The betrayal had begun, and Earth was completely unprepared for what was coming next. It filled the sky above the planet, and weapons that could bend physics itself began charging up to fire. Mothers grabbed their children and ran for shelters, and soldiers rushed to battle stations knowing they were outmatched but ready to fight anyway. I looked at Lyrian one last time and saw genuine pain in the elf face, but it did not matter because pain did not stop the invasion. Ashenthar spread his wings even wider, and they blocked out the stars behind him, and his roar echoed across the void of space in ways that should have been impossible. The dragon was massive, now revealed in his true form, and he was easily as large as an ancient Earth blue whale, and his scales were harder than any armor humanity had ever created. Purple flames began to gather in his jaws, and there were cold flames that could freeze things solid before shattering them into dust. With sonic force, Kate ran for the emergency shuttle bay as Council soldiers began boarding the station, and she could hear weapons fire behind her and people screaming. She made it to a shuttle and launched just as the station main reactor went critical from the attack and exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness. As she flew toward Earth, she could see the Council fleet spreading out above the planet like a net closing around Praymore. Ships kept appearing through those tiers in space, and there seemed to be no end to them. At all, ground forces were already beginning their descent toward the major cities, and Kate knew that everything was about to change forever. The peaceful visitor had been a lie, and the dragon had been a weapon, hidden in plain sight, and now Earth would pay the price for trusting to easily. She activated her communication system and sent out a desperate message to all Earth forces telling them that war had come, and they needed to fight with everything they had below her. The blue planet turned slowly in space, beautiful and fragile, and completely unprepared for the horror that was descending upon it. Kate whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, and hoped that humanity would survive what was coming. The invasion had begun, and there was no turning back now for anyone involved in this terrible night. The first day of the invasion was complete chaos, and nobody knew what to do or where to go. The Council fleet hammered Earth orbital defenses with weapons that seemed to break the laws of physics and make reality bend in impossible ways. Captain Lisa Hayes commanded the warship Defiance, which was one of humanity's newest vessels, built with technology that Lyrian herself had shared with them months ago. Now Lisa understood why the elf had been so generous, because every system had a hidden flaw and every weapon had a weakness built right into it. The Council forces knew exactly where to hit and how to exploit these weaknesses with perfect timing. Lisa shouted orders to her crew as another attack tore through the space where her ship had been just seconds before, and around her the remains of Earth's fleet tried to mount some kind of defense, but they were outmatched and outgunned at every single turn, and ships were dying by the dozens. And the lunar colony of New Hope, a scientist named Amy Parker, watched in complete horror as Council ground forces began dropping from the sky. These were not the peaceful diplomats that Lyrian had introduced to human society weeks ago. These were soldiers dressed in armor that seemed to absorb all light, and they carried weapons that could break matter apart at the molecular level. Leading them was Lyrian herself, and she was riding on Ashenthar back, and the dragon was now revealed in his full, terrifying size. He was enormous and easily as big as an ancient blue whale, and his scales were harder than any armor humanity had ever made. Purple flames poured from his jaws, and they were cold flames that froze defensive positions solid before shattering them with sonic roars that broke stone and metal alike. Amy had worked alongside Lyrian in the cultural exchange program, and they had laughed together and shared meals and talked about philosophy and art. Now, as she watched through the colony sensors, she saw Lyrian directing Ashenthar assault with the cold efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The lunar defenses fell in just a few hours, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Back on Earth, Kate Morrison had made it to the military command center. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, generals and admirals filled the war room, and their faces were grim as report after report came in telling of defeats and losses and entire fleets being destroyed. Kate studied the tactical displays carefully and noticed something important that others had missed. She said they were not trying to destroy humanity, but were instead crippling ships and disabling weapons while avoiding kill shots. General Paul Grant, who commanded all Earth Defense Forces, nodded slowly and said the word that everyone was thinking: slaves. They wanted humanity as slaves to work for the Council. A transmission suddenly broke through on all military channels, and Lyrian's face appeared on every screen in the command center. She sat in what looked like a throne room aboard the biggest Council ship, and Ashenthar massive head was visible just behind her shoulder. She spoke to all people of Earth and said she took no joy in what was happening, but the Council could not allow a species as violent as humanity to spread across the galaxy unchecked. She said humanity would be brought into the fold and civilized and controlled, and that human children would be raised knowing peace under Council. Losh paused and reached up to stroke Ashanthar's snout with one hand, and the dragon eyes fixed on the camera with a predatory intelligence that was terrifying even through a recarding Lyrian, said to surrender now, and the transition would be painless, but if humanity resisted, then Ashenthar had 1,000 brothers and sisters waiting to turn cities into ash. She gave Earth 12 hours to decide their fate. Transmission ended, and the war room was completely silent for a long moment. Then General Grant spoke, and his voice was hard as iron, and he asked for recommendations. He stepped forward and said they should fight, and that they would lose battles and ships and people, but they would make the Council bleed for every inch of ground. Another admiral asked skeptically, how they could fight against weapons that could manipulate gravity and phase through. Defenses Kate replied that they would fight against Lyrian. Guilt because she had seen the elf face during the transmission, and Lyrian did not want to do this. Said there was something else going on that they were missing, and if they could find it, they might find a way to survive. The vote was unanimous, and humanity chose to fight rather than surrender above Earth. The Council fleet began moving toward the planet, and Ashanthar's roar echoed across space as the dragon led his brothers and sisters toward the blue world below. The real war was about to begin, and millions would die before it ended. 3 months into the occupation, Earth had become a planet of shadows and whispers and fear. The Council had taken all the major cities and installed governors who spoke of peace, while Ashanthar and his dragon brothers patrolled the skies as eternal reminders that resistance was useless. Humanity had been forced into designated zones, and their movements were tracked, and all communications were monitored by Council systems. But humans had been fighting guerrilla wars since ancient times, and old skills had not been forgotten. At a Lieutenant Maya Cross led a resistance cell that operated in the ruins of what had once been the great city of Chicago. They had learned to move in the brief windows between dragon patrols and to communicate using ancient methods that Council sensors completely overlooked tonight. They had captured something valuable, which was a Council courier named Varen, who had gotten separated from his escort during a supply run in a room deep beneath the rubble. Maya studied their prisoner care. Full of Varen was a young elf, and his eyes moved between Maya and the other resistance fighters with obvious fear. Said he was just a courier and did not know anything important at all. Maya held up a data crystal they had taken from him and said if that was true, then he would not mind if they looked through it. Varen face went pale, and even paler than any elf face should be able to go hit. Said they could not look at it because if Lyrian found out he had lost it, then something terrible would happen to him. He stopped talking suddenly because he realized he had said too much. Maya leaned forward and asked what Lyrian was afraid of, and why an ancient elf warrior who commanded a dragon was scared of information. Getting out, Viren said nothing, but his trembling got worse. They worked on decrypting the data crystal, and what they found changed absolutely everything they thought they knew. Far above, aboard the biggest Council ship, Lyrian stood in her private chambers staring at a display showing Earth. Belawashanther lay curled in the corner, but his eyes were open and watching her with concern that only a companion of centuries could feel. The dragon said she was troubled. Lyrian whispered that she hated this and hated every moment of the occupation and the lies and the fear she saw in human eyes. Ashanther asked why they continued. Then Lyrian hands became fists, and she said because if they did not do this, then the devourer swarms would come, and it was better for humans to live as servants than to be completely consumed. She said, at least this way, some part of humanity would serve Ashanther. Lifted his great head and said that maybe humans might surprise her because they had surprised the Council before. Lyrian said that in 3 months, humans had done nothing but die bravely, and that courage without power was just suicide. An alarm sounded, and one of her aides appeared on a screen saying they had a problem. A courier had been captured in the Chicago ruins, and his data crystal had been compromisedly. Face froze, and she asked which courier it was. The aide said it was Varen, and the one carrying classified information. Lyrian's voice went cold, and she turned to Ashanther saying they needed to go immediately. The dragon rose and spread his wings, asking what would happen if humans learned the truth. Lyrian said then everything would change. Deep in the resistance bunker, Maya was reading the translated files with growing horror, and understanding both the data crystal contained Council intelligence, reports and strategic assessments, and most importantly, the real reason for humanity. Subjugation. The devourer swarms were an enemy so terrible that the Council, despite all its power, was losing a war of extinction against them. The swarms consumed entire species and entire planets and left nothing but dead rock in their wake. They were spreading through the galaxy at a rate nobody could stop. But there was more information. In the files, the Council had run thousands of simulations testing every possible scenario. In 99% of futures, humanity was consumed by the swarms. In the remaining 1%, humanity was under Council control with their violent nature. channeled and directed as a weapon against the swarms the Council had not invaded. Out of conquest at all, they had invaded out of complete desperation. They were trying to save humanity the only way their computers said was possible. May Parker, who had joined the resistance after New Hope fell, whispered that they were trying to protect humanity by enslaving them. Maya said they were still enslaving people, and that protection nobody asked for was just control by another name before anyone could respond. The bunker sensor screamed a warning. Something massive was coming down from the sky directly above there. Position Ocean Thur had found them. The dragon claws tore through concrete like it was paper, and resistance fighters ran as purple. Flames filled the upper levels, but Lyrian jumped from Ashenthar back and moved within human speed, heading straight for where Varen was being held. She found Maya standing in front of the young courier with the data crystal in her hand. Maya said simply that now she knew the truth. Lyrian's hand went to her weapon, but then fell away. She asked how much Maya had read. Maya said enough to understand that Lyrian was in an impossible situation, but that did not make enslaving people right for a long moment. The elf and the human just stared at each other, then Lyrian's shoulders slumped, and centuries of tiredness suddenly showed in her posture. Said quietly that Maya was right, and that the Council had become the monsters they fought against. The Shinthar Great had appeared in the doorway, and said they had orders to eliminate this resistance. Celerine said she knew, but then looked at Maya. The strange expression, she said, if she let them live and let this information spread, then the Council would remove her from command. But Maya said the information would be out, and humans fight better when they know what they are fighting. For she said Lyrian had claimed humanity needed to be a weapon against the swarms, and that weapons work better when they are willing instead of forced. Lyrian looked at the data crystal, and then at Maya, and then at Ashen. Thirstily, a decision formed in her ancient Aishi. Asked what if there was another way, and a third option that nobody had considered because it required something both species had forgotten. Maya asked what that was. Lorene smiled, and for the first time since arriving at Lorene, Earth, it was a real smile. She said the answer was trust. The message that went out across all channels, both human and Council, was brief, but it shocked everyone. Illyrian announced she was invoking ancient Council law and declaring Earth a sovereign ally under her personal protection was over immediately. Admiral Thel Renos appeared on her screen within minutes, and his face was twisted with rage. Said she had gone mad and did not have the authority to do this. Lyrian interrupted and said she had every authority under Article 7 of the Preservation Accords. She said any Council commander could declare a protectorate alliance if they believed a species was capable of contributing to galactic defense. She told him she believed humanity was not just capable, but was essential to winning the war. The Admiral said the strategic simulations proved otherwise. Lyrian said the simulations were wrong because they only calculated one kind of strength. She said they never accounted for human adaptability or creativity or willingness to fight for something greater when treated as equals. Instead of slaves behind her, Ashenthar rumbled his agreement, and the dragon presence reminded everyone that Lyrian had significant military power of her own. The Admiral's eyes narrowed, and he said she would be court-martialed for this. Lyrian said, then let the High Council decide, but until they did, her protection of Earth would stand. Said any Council forces that attacked Earth would answer to her and to Ashenthar's transmission. Ended. Ashenthar nuzzled Lyrian's shoulder gently and said that was either brilliant or suicide. Lyrian admitted it was possibly both. She turned to Kate Morrison, who stood nearby in what had been declared neutral ground. Kate said humanity needed to prove Lyrian right, and they had perhaps 2 weeks before the Council made their ruling. She said in that time, humans needed to show they could be allies instead of subjects. Lyrian nodded and gestured to her aides, who stepped forward carrying data. Crystal, she said humans would have access to everything the Council knew about the Devourer swarms and all their weapons. Technology. Amy Parker took the crystals carefully and said this would take time to analyze. Kate said they did not have time, and asked if the swarms were coming. Soon Lyrian pulled up a star map, showing a red stain spreading across one section of the galaxy like a cancer. She said the swarms would reach the outer system in about 6 months. She said Council fleets were holding them back, but it was a losing battle. She said they needed something new that the swarms had not adapted to yet. Maya said humanity would give it to them but needed something first. Larian asked what Maya said the truth. In all of it she asked why the council really formed and what they were so afraid of. Larian was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. She told them the council was founded 15,000 years ago. After the first Devourer War, that war had consumed 3/4 of all known civilizations. The survivors banded together and pooled their knowledge and technology and military power. They created the council as a survival pact. They swore an oath to never let another species face the Devourers unprepared, but over thousands of years that oath had twisted into something dark. Protection became control and preservation became domination. The council started conquering species for their own good and forcibly uplifting them and conscripting them. They told themselves it was better than letting species. Delirian said quietly that they became what they fought against. Shenthar voice rumbled through the room saying that was true until they met humans, he said. Humans reminded the council what they had lost. He said humans had the fire to fight, not because they were ordered to, but because it was right. Kate leaned over the star map and asked if they could be ready in 6 months. Lyrian admitted she did not know, but said she believed in human potential more than she had believed in anything for a very long time. Over the next 2 weeks, Earth transformed completely. Council engineers worked alongside human scientists, sharing knowledge freely. For the first time, the sabotaged systems in Earth fleet were removed, and rebuilt new weapons were designed combining council physics with human creativity, and humans proved Lyrian right in ways that surprised even her. When council engineers said a shield could not be made, smaller human scientists found a way using principles nobody had thought to combine. When weapon designs hit limits, human engineers ignored the limits and built working versions through trial and error. One elf scientist told Amy that humans were chaos incarnate after they created a gravity weapon using mining equipment and a car battery. Amy grinned and said thank you and that they would take that as a compliment. But the real breakthrough came when Maya presented her proposal to the Joint Military Command. She said the council fought the Devourer is like a chess match with careful moves and strategic positioning. She said it was logical and smart, and also why they were losing. She said humans should fight differently. Admiral Thelranos, who was watching remotely, asked what she proposed. Maya brought up tactical simulations and said humans would fight unpredictably. She said the Devourers adapted to patterns and logic, but humans do not fight with patterns. She said humans fight dirty and cheat and do unexpected things. Lyrian studied the simulations with wide eyes and said Maya wanted to use controlled chaos as a weapon. Maya corrected her and said she wanted to give the Devourers an enemy they could not predict. She said council forces would provide stable battle lines while humans would be the chaos that disrupted enemy adaptation. Athith laugh was like thunder, and he said he liked this human thinking. The High Council ruling came exactly 2 weeks after Lyrian declaration. The vote was close at 7-5, but it was enough. Earth was recognized as a sovereign Aletha. Occupation was officially ended. Humanity was granted full access to council technology and military support. In exchange, humanity would serve as vanguard forces against the Devourer. Swarms as council's soldiers began withdrawing from Earth. Lyrian stood with Kate, watching the sunset over ruined New York. Kate said quietly that this might all be for nothing and they might all die fighting. Lyrian agreed, but said at least they would die free. She paused and said she was sorry for everything she had done and everything she had ordered. She said no strategic necessity excused what her people had put humanity through. Kate was quiet for a long moment. She said she could not forgive easily because too many had died and too much was destroyed, but she said she could work with Lyrian and fight beside her. Said maybe if they survived, then someday forgiveness would come. Lyrian said softly that was more than she deserved. Kate agreed, but said Lyrian had changed her mind and taken a risk, and that had to count for some. Athingishan third descended from the sky and landed with surprising grace. The dragon settled down and created shelter with his wings as the sun disappeared. He said the swarms were coming in 4 months and asked if they were re-educate, and Lyrian looked at each other. Then at the city below where humans and elves worked together, they said no in unison. Ashenthar eyes gleamed with amusement, and he said, good. he said. The best battles are fought when you are not ready, because it forces creative will. Tolian told her companion he had been spending too much time around humans, though. Dragon replied, or not enough, because they were growing on him. He said he noticed human engineers trying to weaponize his fire breath. Kate laughed and asked if he was offended. Anther said he was offended. They did not just ask because he had ideas to make it more destructive. The three sat in silence as night fell over Earth, preparing for the war. That was coming, a war that would test both species like never before. War that would be fought not between humans and elves, but beside them, as true allies. The Devourer swarms arrived ahead of schedule, and nobody was truly ready. Captain Lisa Hayes was commanding the Defiance when alarms screamed across the entire fleet. The outer system sensor network had detected them, and they looked like a cloud of insects moving through space. They were organic ships that consumed everything in their path, including asteroids and ice and even radiation itself. Lisa ordered all hands to battle stations, and her voice was steady, despite the fear gripping her. Hard around her ship, the combined fleet of human and council forces prepared for the fight of their lives. 300 council warships hung in space with their elegant designs now covered in human weapons. 200 human vessels enhanced with council shields floated nearby. Ready to fight at the front were Ashanthar and his dragon brothers and sisters. 50 dragons in total in each. One ancient and massive and burning with determination to protect what they now saw as their world's Tellurian. Voice came across all channels telling everyone to remember the plan. She said council forces would maintain formation and provide covering fire while human forces were free to engage. However, they wanted. Maya replied with pleasure from her ship. Called Chaosbringer, her vessel had once been an asteroid mining ship, but now it had enough weapons to qualify as a war crime. Around 19 more converted civilian ships formed up, and each one was a unique creation of human desperation. Devourers came like a living wave individual. Ships were organisms, grown instead of built, and each one could consume matter and convert it into more swarm units. They had no crew or pilots, but just a collective intelligence that learned from every battle. The first attack from the Council fleet was perfectly executed. Weapons reached across space, crushing Devourer ships with applications of gravity. Other weapons phased deadly energy through swarm biomass. For a moment it seemed the fleet might actually hold them back. Then the Devourers adapted. New ships emerged from the swarm with hulls that deflected gravitational attacks. Others began phasing in and out of space, making energy weapons useless. The swarm collective intelligence had analyzed the threats and responded in real time. Manmoral Thelranos said grimly that this was why they were losing. He said the swarms adapted faster than anyone could innovate. Kate replied then it was humanity turned. She ordered human forces to execute chaos. Protocol 7. What happened next would become legend. Human ships scattered in patterns that made no sense at all. Some accelerated directly toward the swarm while others flew in spirals. Several opened airlocks and vented atmosphere mixed with metal, creating clouds that disrupted sensors. The Chaosbringer released mining drones reprogrammed to ram enemy ships while broadcasting ancient music on all frequencies. It was complete chaos and madness, and the Devourers could not adapt fast. And Ogashenthar led his dragon brothers in a diving attack with their bodies covered in purple flames. Flames burned at temperatures that should have been impossible in vacuum. But dragonfire was not normal fire. It was ancient energy that came from before Council. Science and the Devourers had no way to adapt to it. One Council officer said this was insane because there was no Lint. Coordinationland corrected him and said there was perfect coordination to be unpredictable. She said every ship was doing something different, forcing the swarm to split adaptation across hundreds of variables. Emmy aboard a science vessel was analyzing Devourer responses in real time. She reported that the swarm adaptation algorithm was overloading. She said when every threat is unique, they cannot decide what to prioritize. Kate commanded all forces to push forward and not give the enemy time to stabilize. The battle went on for 6 hours. Devourer ships fell by the hundreds, but more kept coming. The swarm seemed endless, like a tide that consumed wreckage to spawn new units. Lisa watched as Defiance shields flickered under assault around her ship. Council vessels formed a protective formation, linking shields together. One elf captain said this was what it meant to be allies, he said, fighting for each other, not just beside each other. Lisa directed her weapons to protect a council ship whose shields had failed. She said they were in this together now. But the swarm kept coming. Maya saw it first. She reported to command that there was a pattern in attack vectors. She said the swarm was not trying to break its room anymore, but was funneling the fleet. Kate pulled up tactical displays and cursed the whereas had been driving the fleet into an increasingly tight formation. The edge of sensors, something massive was approaching. Admiral Thelranos identified it as a Devourer Queen-class organism with fear in his voice. He said it was how they created new swarms. He said if that thing reached the inner system, everything was lost. Lirian said firmly it would not reach the inner system. She turned to Ashenthar, who crouched on the command deck. She told her old friend she needed him to do something incredibly dangerous. The dragon eyes gleamed, and he said finally he thought she would never ask Ashenthar, and his dragon brothers broke from the main battle line, accelerating toward the Queen. It was enormous and easily the size of Earth. Moon, it was a pulsing mass that spawned new ships every few seconds. The dragons could not destroy it through normal attacks, because it was too large. But dragons had abilities that Council science never fully understood. The 50 dragons flew in formation, and their bodies began glowing with increasing intensity. Energy built around them, drawn from space itself and channeled through wills honed over thousands of years. Amy asked what they were doing as sensor readings went off the charts. Lirian whispered they were doing something that had not been done in 3,000 years. She said they were creating a star. The dragons' combined power ignited in a sphere of fusion fire around the Queen. For a moment, a new sun burned in the outer system, small and brief, but absolutely devastating. When the light faded, the Queen was gone. It had been vaporized, along with a huge portion of the swarm around it. The remaining Devourer ships, suddenly cut off from coordination, began to fail their attacks, lost all coherence, commanded all forces to make a final push. The combined fleet surged forward with human chaos and council precision working in perfect harmony. Shinthar and his brothers, exhausted but victorious, provided support with regular fire. 4 hours later, the last Devourer ship fell. The fleet hung in space, battered and exhausted. But alive, 23 human ships had been destroyed. 41 council vessels were lost. Thousands had died, but they had won in the aftermath. Lirian stood with Kate and Maya and Lisa and Amy, and the observation deck. Kushinthor lay nearby, visibly drained from the ancient technique he had used. Admiral Thelranos reminded them this was only one swarm. He said there were hundreds more spreading across the galaxy. Kate replied then they would fight hundreds more together. The Admiral said the High Council had approved full integration. He said human forces would be incorporated into all Council battle groups. He said humanity chaos tactics would be studied across the fleet. He paused and said in return, humanity gained full Council membership with voting rights and access to all technologies. He said the Council would make a formal public apology for the invasion and occupation. He said it would be recorded in historical archives as a crime against sentience. Kate looked at Lirian, who nodded slowly. Kate said it was a start. She said, not forgiveness yet, but a start. Me was already looking at battle data. She said the combination of Council precision and human chaos created efficiency 30% higher than either could achieve. Alana Lirian smiled and said if they could replicate this across all battles, they could actually win the war. Lisa gazed out at stars and at wreckage being cleared and at the mix of ships working together. She asked what happens now. Maya said now they prepare for the next battle and the one after that. Larian added that now they prove freedom and alliance can defeat tyranny and hunger. Kate declared that now they show the galaxy humans belong among the stars as equals and allies and friends. Yasinthor laughed and said now he gets to teach human pilots how to coordinate with dragons. Maya grinned and said in their defense, it worked. The dragon huffed and said, barely. He said next time they should ask first, because he had ideas that would not get them killed. They stood together watching as the fleet prepared to return to Earth. The war was far from over. The Devourers would come again and again, testing the alliance. But for the first time in thousands of years, the Council had real hope, not grim determination, but genuine hope, born from partnership and trust. Hope from the chaotic and beautiful cooperation of species who chose to stand together. Larian placed a hand on Kate's shoulder and thanked her for teaching them what they had forgotten. Kate met her eyes and thanked her for being willing to learn. She said that took more courage than any battle. They raised imaginary glasses. Lisa said to New Alliance's Amy, said to Chaos and Precision Maya, said to Freedom Lyrian, said softly to Humanity Ashenthor, finished by saying to all of them, because they were stronger together than apart. As the fleet jumped too faster than light speeds, carrying word of humanity. First great victory, a new chapter began, not just in the war against devourers, but in relationships between species who learned that greatest strength comes from standing together as equals. The sky had burned with battle, and from those flames, a new alliance was forged, one that would change the galaxy forever.